Hey there, truth seekers. Have you ever noticed how a guilty conscience has a way of filling in the blanks for you? You hear a noise in the house late at night, and suddenly it's not just a noise, it's proof someone's there. You see a police car in your rearview mirror, and even when you weren't speeding, your heart still drops. Guilt does that. It takes ordinary information and turns it into a verdict. And that brings us directly to today's question. I'm Lance Smith, and welcome back to the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. This is another installment of our Tuesday Contradiction series, episode number 216, where we slow down, read carefully, and take seriously the kinds of questions skeptics love to raise. Here's the challenge. Did Herod think Jesus was John the Baptist raised from the dead? Or did the gospel writers simply contradict one another? Based on the surface, that's exactly what it looks like. Matthew and Mark seem crystal clear. Herod is convinced. Luke, on the other hand, makes it sound like Herod is puzzled, uncertain, maybe even genuinely confused. So, what are we dealing with here? A contradiction, a mistake, or three inspired writers giving us different angles on the same deeply troubled man? This is a bit like listening to three people describe the same conversation. One remembers what was said out loud, another remembers the tone, and the third remembers the awkward silence afterward. They're not contradicting each other. They're filling in different layers of the same moment. Stick with me, because by the end of this episode, I think you'll see that this so-called contradiction actually gives us one of the most psychologically honest portraits of guilt anywhere in the Gospels. Let's start, as we always should, with the text itself. I'll be using the New Living Translation for clarity. Matthew 14, 1-2. When Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, heard about Jesus, he said to his advisors, "This must be John the Baptist raised from the dead. That is why he can do such miracles." That's straightforward. No hesitation, no qualifiers. Herod draws a conclusion, and he sounds convinced. Now, listen to Mark's account. This is Mark 6, 14-16. Mark tells us that people were circulating various explanations. John raised from the dead, Elijah returned, one of the prophets. Then he adds, but when Herod heard about Jesus, he said, "John, the man I beheaded, has come back from the dead." Again, certainty. And Mark sharpens it with that chilling phrase, "the man I beheaded." This isn't abstract theology. This is personal guilt speaking. You can almost hear the superstition and paranoia in his voice. Herod isn't reasoning like a philosopher here. He's reacting like someone whose conscience just got poked with a sharp stick. Now, here's where the skeptics raise the red flag. Luke 9, 7-9. Luke tells us that Herod was puzzled. Rumors are swirling. Some say John raised from the dead, others Elijah, others that an ancient prophet has appeared. Herod responds, "I beheaded John." So, who is this man I keep hearing so much about? Luke then adds that Herod kept trying to see Jesus. So, here's the skeptic's question, plain and simple. Matthew and Mark say, yes, Herod thought Jesus was John. Luke seems to say, no, Herod is confused and asking questions. So which is it? But before we declare a contradiction, we need to ask a more careful question. Does Luke actually say Herod rejected the idea? Or is Luke showing us something else, something going on inside Herod? Let's reconcile this the way we always try to do, by reading the accounts together, not in isolation. Matthew and Mark zoom in on Herod's fearful conclusion, the reports, the miracles, the memory of that gruesome execution. All of it hits at once, and Herod blurts out what his conscience has already been whispering. "This is John, raised from the dead." Luke, meanwhile, pulls the camera back. He shows us the setting, the rumors, the speculation, the competing explanations flooding Herod's court. Herod's question, "I beheaded John. So who is this?" is not a denial. It's the question of a man who knows exactly what he did and can't explain what he's now seeing. In other words, Luke lets us hear the inner turmoil before the conclusion fully settles. Several solid resources make this exact point. The Veritas Domain blog in the post titled Bible Contradiction, Did Herod Think Jesus Was John the Baptist?, explains that Luke records Herod's wonder and confusion, while Matthew and Mark record Herod's conclusion. As the author very simply puts it, Luke 9 records Herod's wonder, while the other accounts record Herod's conclusion. It's complementary, not contradictory. David Guzik, in his enduring word commentary on Matthew 14 and Mark 6, goes further. He notes that Herod's belief flows directly from a guilty conscience. Guilt clouds judgment. It feeds superstition. It makes irrational conclusions feel plausible. Guzik even mentions that the early church writer Origen suggested there may have been a physical resemblance between Jesus and John, something that only intensified Herod's fear. The site BibleAuthenticity.com, in an article titled, "Did Herod Think Jesus Was John the Baptist?" highlights another key detail skeptics often miss. Luke uses a Greek interrogative. Herod is asking, not denying. He's disturbed, curious, unsettled, and still very much open to the idea skeptics claim he rejected. And this isn't just popular level commentary. Even in peer-reviewed scholarship, such as Michael Wojciechowski's article, "Was John the Baptist Raised from the Dead? The Origins of Mark 6:14-16, published in Biblical Annals, the scholars note that these kinds of rumors reflect first-century expectations surrounding prophets, resurrection, and divine vindication. In other words, the gospel writers aren't inventing contradictions, they're faithfully recording how people actually reacted. Add some historical context, and the picture becomes even clearer. The Biblical Archaeology Society article, "Herod Antipas in the Bible and Beyond," reminds us that Herod regretted executing John, but went through with it because of a rash oath and public pressure. Hearing about Jesus' miracles reopened that wound, and his guilt rushed in to fill the explanatory gap. So, when we put it all together, the answer is clear. Yes, Herod did think, at least for a time, that Jesus was John the Baptist raised from the dead. His guilty conscience pushed him there. But he was also confused, overwhelmed by rumors, and desperately curious, exactly what Luke emphasizes. No contradiction, just harmony. 3 writers, 3 perspectives, 1 ruler who could not escape what he had done. Let me land this with a few closing thoughts. First, this passage shows us how guilt actually works. Herod wasn't at peace. He thought the dead could come back to haunt him because deep down he knew he had done wrong. Friends, that's what unconfessed sin does. It eats at you. It distorts reality. It makes you see ghosts. The good news is we don't have to live like Herod. We can bring our guilt to the cross and find real forgiveness, peace instead of fear. Second, these supposed contradictions keep collapsing under careful reading. The Gospels aren't sloppy copies. They're complementary, eyewitness level accounts that give us a fuller picture of the truth. If you're wrestling with doubts, keep digging. The answers really are there. And finally, remember this. Herod eventually stood face to face with Jesus, as Luke 23 tells us. He mocked him then. But one day, every knee will bow. My prayer is that you and I bow now in worship rather than later in regret. If this podcast is helpful to you, support is always appreciated but never expected. You can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Lance Smith. You can find every episode at BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers.podbean.com. Email me at BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers@gmail.com and join our Facebook page as well. This is Lance Smith wishing you good health, good study, and God's richest blessings. So long, everybody.